Hello, good afternoon. Today, our guest is Dr. Pavlo Blavatsky, and we're going to be talking about corruption and obesity. Hello, Pavlo, how are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me. How can I help you?
Pablo, you studied a fascinating topic, and this topic was awarded an Ig Nobel Prize. You were interested in the link between corruption and obesity. So it is frequently said that politicians are fat because they are corrupt, and corrupt people are pilfering funds. Is this true?
Well, my research shows that there is positive correlation between obesity of politicians and the perceived level of corruption in their country. So, which way the causality goes, I actually cannot say. There is just positive correlation. So you could argue that, well, people that are elected, they have a nice life. They take bribes and they get fat out of it. Or it could be the other way around. It could be that if fat guys got elected, they feel that next time they will not be re-elected, so they profit from the short times that they are in power to take bribes. Which way it goes, I actually don't say. I just point out to a fact that, well, in fact, there is a positive correlation between these two.
And why did you study the former states of the Soviet Union?
I'm looking at the average politician. So the way how this works, I basically estimate the body mass index of a bunch of politicians, and then I take the median. All right, and for looking at the bunch of politicians, you basically need to have all cabinet ministers, and it's easy to know who is the prime minister of such and such country. But when it comes, for example, I don't know, minister of agriculture, well, it might be tough. In the UK, I don't even know who that is. So you need to go to the local papers to dig out the names, and it might be tricky because local papers might be in local language and not in English. And since I come from that region, so I speak a lot of languages that give me access to the local papers. That was just super easy for me to do it on that sample, and that's what I did.
Pavlo, you found a clear correlation between obesity and the corruption. So Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, these are countries with the lowest median estimated ministers' body mass index, and these are also countries with lower levels of corruption. The most corrupt post-Soviet states are three Central Asian countries: Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. The three post-Soviet states with the highest median estimated ministers' body mass index are Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Ukraine. So some of the most corrupt countries also have the fattest ministers.
Um, yeah, well, one thing is we are talking here about perceived corruption. So you
Yes.
you said corruption. In fact, corruption itself it's very tricky to measure. So we actually cannot. So what the way how the methodology goes, it's basically they ask a bunch of people who, for example, are doing business in such and such country. How do they rank between 1 and 10? This country, do they think that well, their experience was very corrupt or a little bit corrupt or not corrupt at all, and then they aggregate this data. So this is always asking subjective opinions, so hence perceived corruption. It's not a real corruption. Real corruption might be trickier, but there are some ways. There is a cool paper how they measure corruption by import of luxury Swiss watches, because it's like a medium of exchange when you give bribes. It's something which is very small and very precious, so it's kind of kind of very useful if you give bribes, apparently. But I'm not doing that. I was doing perceived corruption. So just to clarify, we are talking here about perceived corruption, and the body mass index. Likewise, I mean, politicians, they just don't tell you how fit they are or how obese they are. So it's a bit tricky to find their weight and height. And what I did, it was actually pretty cool because I was doing AI. So I built artificial neural network that is basically doing the job. You feed a photograph of a politician to it, and it gives you an estimate how obese this person is. And the way how it works, if you're interested in methodology, is that you have a database of pictures of various people for whom you know height and weight, so you can estimate precisely calculate the body mass index, and then you train your artificial neural network on this database. And once it is trained, and it's like millions of parameters to estimate, you feed to it pictures of politicians for whom you don't know the body mass index, and it estimates the obesity of this or that politician, and then you compare this estimated obesity versus perceived level of corruption. And surprise, surprise, there's a positive correlation. So countries that are perceived less corrupt, they have leaner politicians. And curiously, they have on average more obese population. And the countries that are perceived more corrupt, they have more obese politicians. And curiously also, they have leaner populations. So
I was just about to discuss that point. I was wondering if there is a link between the obesity of politicians and the population. So, are fat politicians a representative of their population?
Well, apparently they are not. So apparently, if you have fat politicians, you have a leaner population. But hey, this is just a speculation. I actually was not doing research on that, but it looks just on the face of it that there is negative correlation. So the countries that elect more obese politicians, they tend to have healthier population. So it's actually better for the country, I think. But I was not researching that question at all. So
yes, that's what you said. They are not representative of their population, which I found interesting, because if people in a country are obese, that could be a cultural problem. So, for example, in Sweden, the population is relatively healthy, and Americans of Swedish descent are also relatively healthy.
Yeah, but as I said, I was not really looking into the population itself. It's just one of the things that.
Hold on for a second. Come 1 second.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, continue. So I'm back. Yeah, so you were saying you were not discussing that question, but I was just making the point that politicians usually reflect the norm in some cases. So if
Yes.
the
It turns out
are likely to be lean.
In my sample, there was slight negative correlation, but as I said, I actually didn't look at all. That was one of the things that the referees were interested in. So I looked at it, and it looks like there was slight negative correlation, but I was not really going deep into that question. That was not what I was interested in. I was interested really in how to measure corruption. And the thing is, I was not quite happy with the subjective measures, because different people might have different ideas what it means to be corrupt. So if, as you said, if you ask somebody who is in Sweden, what constitutes a corrupt behavior? Well, they might have a very high standard, and then you might ask somebody, I don't know, in the Italy, if what do they think is a corrupt behavior, and they might have a different standard of what is corruption. So if you aggregate these opinions, it's like comparing apples and oranges. Might not be exactly the same thing. So I was looking how can we construct something more objective, and scanning the photographs of politicians. That sounds pretty cool. In fact, in economics, it's one of the first papers where you looked at graphical data. It's relatively uncommon to use pictures as a database. So I don't know. I think that's why people noticed that paper, and well, it got all the publicity that it got.
Yes, it did. Yes, it made it famous. But Professor Blavatsky, I want to talk just briefly about corruption. I think we're on the same page. I'm honest. I assume that you're also honest. If I find $1 million, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to give it up. I've found the money before and I've given it up. But corruption does not impede economic growth. Corruption can lower the quality of growth. Corruption deprives people of resources. But look at China. China is corrupt.
Well, good question. I was not looking at China.
Yeah, and that's an example. Do you think that corruption is overrated?
Well, in the literature, there are two schools of thought, if you wish. I mean, some people say that corruption helps to grease the wheels of economy and make the things turn around. So it might actually be a necessary evil when there is no other way to bypass bureaucracy to do business. And then there is actually quite a large literature that shows there are many negative effects of corruption. So again, I'm not really into that because I personally find that a big elephant in the room is what is corruption. Because we do not really have a good measure of corruption, and that's where I wanted to chip in with my research, and I wanted to propose a method that is a little bit more objective than simply going around and asking people, for example, is China corrupt or not? I mean, different people might have different opinions, and some people might think that China is very corrupt, and some people might think that China is actually pretty okay in terms of doing business and openness. So there's divergence of opinions, and these are subjective things, and it's difficult to get to the bottom of it, whether China is really corrupt or not. So what can we do? And there I found this interesting paper where they look at the cycles of election of Chinese Communist Party officials, and there is a correlation between these cycles and the importation of luxury Swiss watches. So that is indirect link that shows that, well, there is corruption exactly when Communist Party elects officials. Well, they seem to import a lot of these expensive watches to pay the bribes. So that was pretty cool. And I was thinking, well, what can we do else? And obesity. My idea of obesity was that again, it comes from the literature that one of the forms of corruption is you invite politicians to dinners with excessive consumption of food and alcohol. And I thought, okay, well, if somebody is invited very often to these banquets, well, the risk is that you probably will get extra pounds. And then if you don't have a lot of free time to exercise, well, you might just get obese. And I wanted to test it, and it turns out that yes, there is positive correlation. But as I said, I just point out to positive correlation, not the causality. No,
I know the paper you're discussing. You wrote two papers on the topic. One is a reply titled "Obesity of Politicians and Corruption in Ukraine in 2000 to 2020 Reply." You speak about the Swiss watches in this paper.
Yeah, exactly. So in that paper, I actually looked at intertemporal correlation. So I take one country, but over many years, and I found that there was correlation between Swiss watches perceived level of corruption, but also obesity, and then it looked almost like magic, because there were years where the country there was no discrepancy in trade data of Swiss watches, but also there was very low perception of corruption, and also the politicians were very lean, and it all coincides in some years, and that looks almost by magic. You would not expect this to happen by chance. So that was, I think, pretty cool find. And the original paper looked at cross-country correlation within 1 year. Yeah.
Well, your studies have been corroborated. There is a 2024 paper arguing that anti-corruption campaign measures significantly decrease the BMI and overweight rates of senior government officials. This paper was published in one of the Science Direct journals. I don't remember the name at the moment, but it's a recent paper.
Okay.
Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization. That's a popular journal.
Okay. Yeah. It could be. I mean, yeah, there were quite few people interested in trying to apply this methodology to other regions, other countries. I mean, the idea got kind of a little bit popular, I guess.
Yes, and then there's another paper titled Re-examining the Blavatsky Hypothesis. Are the fat cats fat or just old?
Oh, yeah, I know that paper. Yes. They actually replicated my results, and then made an extra check for the age, which I didn't do in my paper. So that was an important addition, I guess.
But Professor Blavatsky, you seem to enjoy studying controversial topics like marriage, for instance. Why do old women marry young men?
Yeah, that was an interesting model that I have written a few years back. But that's microeconomic. It's a theoretical paper. It's not empirical.
But for those of us who don't know, what's microeconomics?
It's a branch of economics that studies individual behavior. So we are not talking here about countries, nations, but really on the individual level. And personally, I think that's more interesting to study, because that can connect to everybody. And I'm particularly doing a lot on decision theory, how people.
I was just about to ask you that. What's decision theory? I was just about to ask you that.
Decision theory is even smaller branch of microeconomics, where we study how people decide when they face risk or uncertainty, and how they make decisions. So that's really the core of my research.
But I still want to know, Pablo, why
Yeah.
do old women marry younger men?
Well, let's stick to corruption, okay? Because that is highly mathematical topic, and to be honest, whenever I have like dinner and then people ask me, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" I always bring up corruption paper, because that's a topic that everybody enjoys discussing. Everybody can connect. It's easy to understand, and once I'm start talking about my mathematical papers, after 30 seconds everybody says, shut up, it's too boring.
No, it's not boring. No, when you're discussing the mathematical papers, don't talk about the model, just jump to the conclusion.
Well, to be honest, in that paper about marriage, only the title is sexy. The model is actually pretty mathematical, so I don't think that you would enjoy talking about that. Whereas corruption, I mean, it's an interesting topic, because you don't need to have PhD. I mean, it's something that you understand immediately what the paper is about, and then everybody seems to have an idea, and why it is true or not true, and it always generates a lot of discussions, and it's not representative really of my research, but this is the topic that grabs everybody's attention. So it's probably the sign of our days too.
So, Pablo, have
Yeah.
you conceptualized a theory of corruption? Why are politicians corrupt?
No, that would be a more macroeconomic model. And as I said, I'm microeconomist. I basically write models about individuals, how people decide individually or maybe in small groups, but not on the level of the country. There are simply too many variables, too many unknowns. I don't really feel qualified to work there, and I don't really like that field. So my research interests are really on the individual level, and for the corruption, I was just curious, to contribute with an objective measure of corruption. Hopefully, that could help in practice. But I have no ambition of constructing a theoretical model of corruption. I just think there are so many unknowns, and first, I think we need to get the empirical data straight. Since it's so difficult to measure corruption directly, we need to develop some objective measurement of how corrupt is a country, and that once we have empirical facts on the table, then we probably can try to build a model of corruption. But right now, I feel like we still don't know a lot about this phenomenon. So there is a lot of empirical work to be done before we.
Pablo,
Yeah.
corruption is not corruption at a definition. It's at a definition, but there are some decisions that are perceived to be corrupt, even though they might not empower any specific politician or senior public official. So, for example, most jobs are not advertised. In the private sector, people get jobs based on networks, and sometimes in the government sector, people get jobs on networks. Many jobs, I've seen that data before, many jobs are not advertised. So if you know a PhD in economics and this person worked at several banks, he has strong quantitative skills, your company needs an economist, you trust that individual, you give him a job. In the
Right.
government service, jobs should be advertised. That is the law.
Yes.
Sometimes competent people get jobs even though the position was not advertised, or the position was advertised, but the person who got the job didn't even need to show up to the interview because the senior officials wanted to give that person the job because, based on their knowledge, he was the best individual for the job. Now, if the post was advertised and the best individual got the job, but the best individual was never one of the candidates, he was the person who was selected by an official to get the job. I consider that to be a breach of the government rule, but it's not corruption. I don't consider it to be corruption.
Well, you see, it comes down to how do we measure corruption? What is really corruption? And that's really what motivated me to write these papers, because I find that we still lack a tool how to measure corruption, and there is a lot of disagreement. And now you see, if you ask about this particular instance, whether this behavior in a government giving position to somebody by networking and not through open selection process, whether this is corruption or not, you might say, well, this is not really corruption, and I might say, well, I think this is corruption. So there is disagreement between you and I on the fact is this a corrupt behavior or not, and that's for me, a big problem with subjective opinion aggregation of subjective opinions, which is right now the basic how, for example, Transparency International is measuring corruption and many other organizations. And I feel that we might do a better job. We might develop a better measurement of corruption. I'm not saying that looking at obesity is the solution, but it could be one of the methods. Maybe we could develop some weighted average of many factors, one of which is obesity. But the advantage of my research was to show that, hey, if you want to know how corrupt is some remote country where there are not many people going there doing business there, so it's really hard to ask somebody opinion, is this a corrupt country or not? Well, instead of asking subjective opinions, you might scan the pictures of politicians, and that might give you some idea how this country is corrupt or not. And I think that's pretty cool, because from my research, that there is a positive correlation. So if you see that on average politicians are obese, well, that might be a good indicator that the country might be corrupt, and then that might matter for policy decisions, whether you want to give loans, for example, to that country, or if you're in the private sector, whether you want to establish a firm there or not and doing business there. So that's a little bit what was my thinking about when I started this research.
I think you should measure the disparity in wealth between the point of entrance and the point of exit, because some politicians enter politics not being wealthy, they're not from a rich background, and they leave politics owning mansions and being worth 20-30 million. Now, what does that say about the political system? In America, there are many politicians like that.
That's a great idea. Unfortunately, that's not so easy to measure wealth. People hide this information.
Of course, people hide their wealth. Some people, when they enter politics, they conceal their wealth. Others are not coming from a rich background. They're young professionals. They don't have a strong source of income, and they retire from politics being really rich. Now, if you enter politics being worth 5 million, or if you enter politics as an attorney, I can understand. But when you spend 40 years in politics, why are you a millionaire? Like, I like rich people. It's good to be rich. But if you are spending 40 years in politics, and during that time you did not start a business, you had no known business associate, why do you have millions of dollars? Where did you get the money from?
That's true, but once again, I think collecting data on wealth is extremely challenging. It's probably even it's probably one of the most difficult data to collect. Unfortunately, it's not so easy. You might have a wealth for some individuals, but if you want to do it systematically, like for many countries and for every politician, it's a major challenge. And that's so you are talking basically about direct measurement of corruption, and it's really difficult. It's one of the reasons why we are using indirect proxies, because direct measurement is so much difficult, and also it's dangerous. I mean, once you start to dig into this data, people could just disappear, and there are some journalists that just disappear from the face of the earth, and so this is another factor that you might think about before you do this. So instead of digging into personal wealth, you might want to find some proxy variable that is correlated with your variable of instance. So we call it instrumental variable, and that is much easier to measure. And my idea was with obesity, but then hey, maybe somebody else will come up with some other idea, and I hope that this is how science progresses. That one day we would have more and more reliable measures of corruption, and then we can really measure the phenomenon, and then there would be so much more clarity. What are we talking about when we say corrupt? Because for me right now, it's not really clear. Yeah.
Which country are you from again? You live in France, right?
Oh wow, this is a long story. I was born in Soviet Union, then it became Ukraine. Then I moved to UK. I did my masters in Cambridge. Then I did my PhD in Prague, capital of Czech Republic. Then I had my postdoc in Zurich in Switzerland. Then I moved to Australia. So even before that, I was in Innsbruck in Austria. My first professorship. Then I moved to Australia on the other side of the planet, and now I am in south of France. So yeah,
Okay, you're
I'm
in
a
France.
product of globalization. I was moving.
Okay, and you studied at Cambridge. Good school.
Yes, I did
Which
my
college? King's College, Cambridge.
Clare Hall. I was at Clare
Oh,
Hall
okay,
in
okay.
Cambridge, and then later on, when I was writing my PhD, I was also visiting one semester in University of Nottingham. So I have quite a few connections to
Yeah.
UK.
No, I brought up Cambridge. I studied at another school in the UK, Glasgow.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, but I would have studied at Cambridge. I didn't
Mm.
go though. I didn't go, but I no literally I was going to go there to study. Like got
Ah,
at King's College, Cambridge, but I didn't go.
okay.
Yeah, so
No, no, but
um,
I enjoyed my time in Cambridge. It's I mean it's a lovely town, and it's
Cambridge has really good journals. I
uh,
like the Journal of Institutional Economics. That's
yeah.
really fantastic.
Yeah. It's, no, no, they've got great faculty and also medieval architecture. It's like wow, walking into Harry Potter movies. So that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, but I know the mathematics is quite difficult. I'm not going to ask you to elaborate on the numbers, but in simple terms, why do older women marry younger men? It won't leave my mind. I just need to know.
uh, well, it's a model of a matching market, and in fact, the phenomenon in my model is driven by so-called pay gap. That basically men are earning more than women, and the matching in my model is made not by what we would call love or romantic feeling, but basically women are trying to get the partner with the highest possible income, and then since there are more men who earn more than women, so there is a certain discrepancy on the matching market, and then the way it works, that this wage gap is basically causing an age gap in the matching markets. It's like in very simple terms, if you wish, but it's a mathematical model, and if you know nothing about matching markets, it's a little bit difficult to explain.
Yes. Gender pay gap, that's an interesting topic. Do you plan to do any studies on the gender pay gap?
No. It was long time. It was like 10 years ago that I have written that paper, and I think you got attracted to the sexy title, and honestly, it's a mathematical model which is not sexy at all. And probably the sexiest part of the paper is the title. And if you look at the model, I mean, it's full of Greek letters, and it's a serious mathematical model. So it's not sexy at all.
Pablo, whenever people mention corruption, they're usually referring to corruption in the public sector or entrepreneurs who bribe government officials. But there have been fewer studies on the cost of private corruption.
Yes, very good question, because we basically rarely measure corruption on the private level. It's much more difficult. Imagine that you are working in a country, in the company, and then well, if you were to ask employees of that company, do they think if CEO is corrupt or not? Oh, well, that's a bit of a challenge if they continue to work for the same guy. So we actually have not that much data on the private level, and that's where I thought, well, something like my measurement through obesity could be useful proxy when you cannot go directly with questionnaires asking employees of the company
But
about internal corruption.
Pablo, there is a catch. Remember, on average, CEOs are taller than other men. CEOs are usually fit people because the CEO projects his stature. When you're fit, people equate your physique with competence. So a CEO will not be fat and sloppy. So what metric are you going to use to determine corruption in the private sector? How do you know?
Good question. Good question. You see, this is avenue for future research.
Exactly, because the average CEO is a fit guy. So if a CEO is fat and sloppy, that's not a good proxy because CEOs don't want to be fat and sloppy.
So you see, you identified an avenue for
I
future
think,
research
look,
on
because
non-corruption in
it's
the
so
private
interesting.
sector. This
Yes,
could be
this is a
uh,
good proxy. This is a good proxy. I don't think the CEO owning a mansion is a good proxy, or even owning a fleet of cars. This is a really good proxy. Maybe you should measure affairs.
maybe
Because if
you
a CEO is having an affair, he's going to use extra cash to take care of his mistress or mistresses.
maybe you can write a paper about that.
Maybe I should.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
I should.
No, it's a very
And
relevant
parties, you could also
topic.
look at parties because some companies they have a party at the end of the year, or sometimes they keep parties to celebrate major events, and
Yeah.
that's one way for them to, what some would say, wash dirty money.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You see, there are many ideas. It's definitely, I think,
Yeah,
somebody
yeah,
should
I
look.
know you really like that topic, the CEOs, because a CEO won't be fat and sloppy.
No, no, but this is a private sector. It's a huge question because
Yeah.
I really think that we do not have any good measures for measurement of corruption there, and we should have something because I mean definitely there is corruption in private sector, and we should somehow measure it. And the question is how. And you got some ideas, and somebody should look into that.
Maybe you should look into it.
Yes, yes, yes.
Because they like mathematics. It's just like the trading business. It's really easy for a trader to be corrupt because you can exploit people in a trade. You make money and they make money. And it only shows up as corruption when your clients start to lose. So there was this guy in France. I don't remember his name, but it was a big story. He was working at a bank and he was doing illegal trades on the side and he made a lot of money. And then when the trade started to plummet, it became obvious that it was a fraud. Maybe you're familiar with the story too, but I can't remember his name.
well, yeah, I'm sure there are many stories like that.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
So
So,
again, how would you measure corruption in the financial space? Because we only know that sometimes we only know that the financial executive was corrupt when the company starts to fail.
yeah, 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 that's true. Good question. To be honest, applications in private sector, it's a hot topic. I didn't really work on this data. And hey, maybe when we finish the interview, I get some time to look into that.
Are you interested in sports? Because I'm from Jamaica and Jamaicans like to run. We do well at athletics, and you have
I,
written some
uh,
papers
I,
on the
I,
Olympics.
I'm big into sailing. I maybe one day I will sail to Jamaica.
Okay, maybe you should. Maybe you should.
That's one of my projects to cross
Do
Atlantic.
you do you remember any of your papers on the Olympics, because those are pretty old?
Uh, yeah, when I was just starting my career as economics, I was doing some research on Olympics, but then I moved to individual behavior, and yeah, I don't do sport competitions. Yeah.
And what were you measuring in those studies?
Oh, look, they were not published, so I don't really like to talk about unpublished research.
Okay, okay.
It's it's a little bit like talking about unfinished business. Once it is published, yeah, it's we can talk about it. But since it was never really published, I don't think we should waste time on that.
Okay. So do you plan to continue those working papers then?
No, not really. I have barely time to have so many projects at the moment that I have barely time to finish the current projects. No time to look at this. And I was
You like
very
sports? No, people really like sports. I'm not a sports person, but people are really
yeah.
fascinated with
I
sports.
I I know.
Yeah, I don't. Do you like sports? I don't really care.
Uh, yes, I love
I like
cycling.
ping pong, but I suck at it. I don't play it well, but I like ping pong.
Yeah, I personally love horse riding. I love cycling. I love sailing. So and skiing also. Right now, winter is coming, so it's a good
Okay,
time for skiing.
I love walking. I really love walking. I love table tennis, but I suck at table tennis. I enjoy playing it, but I am so poor. But I like it anyway. But sports like football and basketball, no,
You are competitive sports, okay?
no. It's not because they're competitive. I think they're dull.
Mm, okay.
There is this no.
Mm,
They're sports like football and basketball are really instinctive sports.
mm.
Yeah,
Well,
they for me personally, they convey something else. It's just like boxing. I don't particularly like boxing. I used to love wrestling because I like it when women fight. Like men
wow.
like to watch women fight.
Okay.
So I like wrestling. But
Well, look, if you don't have any more questions on corruption, maybe we will wrap it up.
yeah,
Because
not an issue. I was planning because I know that you have something else
yeah,
to
yeah,
do.
yeah. I have
So
another
we
meeting
can't
coming
speak
up.
for 1 hour. But
Sorry,
yeah,
I
yeah,
have
it was speaking to you
basic
has been great. You seem to be very energetic. I just hope your future meetings are just as energetic as this one.
yeah. Well, I'm a pretty energetic person, and well, schedule is pretty full too.
All
So
right. So thanks for coming on, and we'll correspond via email. Just respond to my email when I send them.
okay,
All right. So see you.
that's
Bye.
fine. It was nice talking to you, and good luck with your podcast.
All right. You too. Bye.
Yeah, bye.